before I kick off on this, could I do a quick straw poll of who has heard of Anexo in this room? Everybody at the front, which is excellent. So a few. Okay. Really, I tend to start this off with just a fairly straightforward: what do we do and why are we good at it? So, Anexo is a integrated legal services and credit hire business. The business started off as a credit hire business about 25 years ago, and nearly 30 years ago now, I come to think about it. And we look after the non-fault motorists. So in other words, these are people who are involved in an accident which is not their fault. We look at the impecunious client. Impecunious means they haven't got any money. What does that mean? That means that they don't have the wherewithal to get their vehicle repaired or replaced through their own resources. These are people who don't have any money, they don't have any credit, they don't have access to a credit card. They can't go down the normal route which you or I might go down if we needed to get a vehicle on the road while ours is being repaired. This allows us to charge credit hire rates which are marginally higher than the spot rate which you and I would get if we booked something from budget. And it's worth bearing in mind that if you went into budget and Hertz and so on and said, I need a car and I need to drive it off the forecourt now, the rate you're going to be paying is considerably higher than the rate that you tend to see advertised in the press when they say £40 a day or something. That's when you book it 3 months in advance because you're going on holiday. So our rates have never been described by any court as too high or egregious, and therefore we are very happy with the premium that we can charge. So 1996, that's the credit hire division. 3 business units: cars and light commercial vehicles, motorbikes and bicycles. The majority of our business at the moment is motorcycles, and we actually own those vehicles. They tend to be the 125 twist and goes and below. There's been an explosion in the number of bikes out there. I mean, during COVID, the number of delivery drivers went through the roof, and I'm sure any of you who've had the misfortune to go to a fast food takeaway outfit will realise that there are more people waiting outside to pick up the food and take it to people than there are actually people within ordering the food for themselves. So it's been a huge growth area. And also, if you're riding a 125 motorbike and you're in a hurry, it's not a question of are you going to get knocked off, it's a question of when are you going to get knocked off and how much is it going to hurt when you do. So it's worth bearing in mind that these have a hard life, these bikes. The difference between us and any competition, although there isn't much competition, is that this is a direct capture business. So we have a sales network which has put together a network of roughly 1,150 independent body shops and repairers. These tend to be 2-man operations. Once again, if you're an impecunious customer, you can't really go to a main dealer. There's no point. Your car is too old and you don't have any money in the first place. So normally you take it to your guy around the corner. We've all got one, I'm sure. I've got one. And say, look, this has had a knock. Can you help me sort it out? And if he's one of our garages, they're in luck because he'll say, well, actually, why don't you bring these people and they'll help you out and we should be able to get a vehicle on the road the same day. I'll come back to the credit hire business shortly. On the other side of the business is legal services and our wholly owned firm of solicitors, which is called Bond Turner. Now, every single edge case goes through Bond Turner. So claiming back from the at-fault insurance company is handled exclusively by Bond Turner. So we look at the recovery of hire charges and repair charges from the at-fault insurer, also specialist reports, personal injury where appropriate. We also have active divisions on housing disrepair and class actions, including emissions, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of the publicity about diesel emissions, and I'll come on to that in a wee bit. So everything from Edge goes through. Our chairman, Alan Sellers, who's a barrister by trade and was the founder of the business, oversees all the advocacy. He's enormously experienced and, as I say, has been doing this for 30 years or more. The issue we have is that we have a December year end, so to be honest, I'm going to gloss over some of these financials because first half of 23, it's really ancient history, but you'll see that there's a gratifying number of plus signs on the right-hand side. I always like to point those out. So certainly for the first half of 23, then things are moving in the right direction. We've been paying down debt, we have generated cash from operating activities, and we're continuing to benefit from increasing the number of settlements. The business has been on a growth pattern for quite some time. Ultimately, it's very straightforward. If you run a law firm and you have more people working at the law firm, it means you settle more cases, which means you bring in more money, and that money then goes to fund the new cases which go through the system. So it's been a process of recycling cash through the business from inception. 118 million, we're 79.1 million. We're about 77 million, I suppose, as of today's share price. So what are we different? We are adversarial towards insurance companies. We're not interested in insurance companies. We actually take actions against them. Why do people come to us rather than going to their insurance company? There are three main reasons for this. Because they're trying to keep their premiums as low as possible. Number one, they won't tick the box for a replacement vehicle. Number two, they won't really have a no claims bonus or have the ability to get a no claims bonus. But perhaps most importantly, they will keep their excess as high as possible because it keeps their premiums as low as possible. So if you can be road legal for £40 a month and your excess is £1,200, you'll get your vehicle on the road because that's the most important thing. Without that, you can't work or you can't take the kids to school or whatever it is. There's no point. If you have a vehicle that's worth at best £1,500, it's got £1,500 of damage to it and your excess is £1,600, you're stuck. So that's an obvious market for us, and it is a huge market, unquestionably. We feel quite strongly that we are actually a force for social good. We are helping people who are not in a position to help themselves, and this is based on the common law proposition, supposition, that you should take your victim as you find him. If somebody is put in an invidious position through no fault of their own, the view of the courts is that they should be able to be returned to the position they would have been had that event not occurred. So if somebody doesn't have a car because somebody's written it off on the road, they should be given another car until the problem is sorted out by the insurance company. That should be their right, because otherwise, they're taking the kids to school on the bus, or they can't get to work, or their life is made very inconvenient. So we feel quite strongly about that. We have a very, very strong internal screening process. Firstly, to work out the extent to which we can provide a vehicle so that the repair or the write-off is processed properly. And then secondly, obviously, to look at the impecuniosity, which is an excellent word, of our clients. We get to look at bank statements, we look at credit card statements, we look at credit ratings and so on. So it's fairly obvious whether or not, to be honest, people have got any money. And that statistic is absolutely true. Less than a 2% failure rate in cases where litigation commences. Normally we will settle cases before litigation, because ultimately when the insurance company is guilty, insurance companies don't like paying out money, as I'm sure we're all aware. Their job is to protect their balance sheet. So broadly speaking, they tend to ignore letters, they tend to ignore claims against them. Most people write them desperate letters saying, no, you really do owe some money, please could you pay us? We don't, we just issue a writ and say we'll see you in court. And 98% of these cases settle, and almost all of them settle before having to go to court, because broadly speaking, the insurance companies realise that they don't have a compelling case which will stand up in court. On the rare occasions when they do go to court, once again, we win 98% of cases. To be honest, it's very rarely we do lose. When we do lose, two reasons. Number one, sometimes it's a he said, she said, and to be honest, the judge just doesn't believe our client, although it doesn't happen very often. Number two, our client may be a foreign national, and because it takes a great deal of time to get from inception to actually the court date, then it's entirely possible that they've gone back to Brazil or wherever it happens to be that they've come from, and therefore we can't get hold of them. If we haven't got a client, we haven't got a case. But as I say, those are outliers. Vast majority settled before. One of the issues we've had is getting high quality staff on the legal side of things. You can't just take a conveyancing solicitor and say, well, today you're doing credit hire or housing disrepair, which I'll come on to. You have to train them up. And so a solution to that is we've set up a thing called the Anexo Academy. So we take the young guys who are coming out of college or whatever and say, look, do you want to become a solicitor? We'll help you. It's like the old articles. We'll help you through and train you up and get you to a position where you have a future with the business, or should you choose outside the business. So we look after our people pretty well. The market opportunity is huge. There's about 33 million cars, 1.4 million motorcycles, large numbers of personal injury accidents, and the credit hire accidents per annum are upwards of 300,000. So we've got about 22,000 cases outstanding at any one moment. That's a tiny proportion of the market. We cover England and Wales. We don't do anything up here because we would need a different badge for a Scottish solicitor. It's always on the cards that one day we might buy a Scottish solicitor, and that will enable us to do stuff in Scotland or do more stuff in Scotland. But we cover England and Wales. But we have broad swathes of England and Wales where perhaps we could do with some more garages. Most of our business is within urban areas, as you would expect, within the M25, Liverpool, Birmingham, Manchester, the usual suspects. And as I say, our fleet is now roughly 90% motorbikes. So just to give you some basic KPIs, you see with the number of hire cases settled, we look at the number of new hire cases funded, so those are two different things, and the number of completed vehicle hires, which is also a different thing. So when you complete a vehicle hire, that's when we send the first letter to the insurance company, and if necessary, apply for a court date. And if I apply for a court date now, then I'm probably going to get one in about 15 months' time. So that is the drag, and therefore the cases that are settled are probably cases that have been completed 12 to 15 months previously. So it takes a long time for us to collect our cash, but when we send out that letter, we know that we're going to get it. It's just a question of waiting for it. In fairness, if insurance companies paid up on the spot, then life would be a lot easier, but insurance companies are not interested in doing that, because this is my personal view, this is not a corporate view, but my personal view is I'm sure they've worked out that a lot of people just give up when they just ignore you. We don't. It's that straightforward. We don't, and we say, we'll see you in court. Another part of the business which has been a growth area for us is housing disrepair, and this is not dissimilar. The Homes Fit for Human Habitation Act came into force to make sure that people who lived in rented accommodation lived in reasonable standards. 25% of renters, we think, will make a damp claim or a mould claim or a housing claim of some description. There are about 4 million people in social housing in the country, about 4.4 million in private housing, and you're probably aware that some of the conditions in which some of these people live are absolutely shocking, and we see the evidence every day in terms of the photographs that come through to us. This is a good business for us because the return on capital is very healthy, and the length that it takes to settle the case is much less than that for a traditional credit hire business. So typically we'll settle in 120 to 150 days. It's a very straightforward business to the extent that if we send round an independent surveyor and he does a survey, gets his dampometer out, takes pictures of the mushrooms or the cockroaches or whatever they are, it's very difficult for a landlord to argue against that because it's all relatively black and white. I think one of the problems once again is inefficiency. A lot of these housing associations have very large estates. You know, let's say it's 75,000 properties in one particular city. When do they ever have the time to go around and check every single one of them, especially because these blocks of estates change hands on a fairly regular basis? So a lot of it is just inefficiencies because they simply don't know. A lot of our claimants, our clients, don't really know how to deal with this. So in some ways, they're lucky to have us to do it for them. How do we get that business? We do some advertising on social media. There's also a lot of cross business. You know, if you are impecunious and you're driving a very poor quality car, it's entirely possible you're living in substandard housing. So it's a useful cross-reference for us. So this business is in its infancy, but you can see the growth has been absolutely huge. So you know, 50-60% over the half on half for 23 to 22, and this is going to become a major driver for our revenues going forward. Once again, there's a training issue. You can't just take people and put them into it. It's quite a technical issue, and there aren't very many people who do it. We think we've cornered the market in good housing disrepair solicitors, and we're very pleased with that. The other thing we do at Lord Turner is legal and class actions. Now, the headline one of this is emissions litigation. I'm sure you've come across the diesel emissions scandal, which is, in a nutshell, where manufacturers put in a, quote, cheat device to fool the testers so that the cars, when tested, were giving out lower emissions than they actually were. And this is relatively universal, allegedly, that every manufacturer was doing it. We reached an agreement with VW in June 2023. There are considerable restrictions on what I can say about this because we have a fairly onerous NDA, but we created a net cash position of 7.2 million. That's 7.2 million net of every single cost, which includes expenditure on getting the cases together, on working our way through them, on paying our litigation funders, on paying our clients their share of the compensation which was awarded. So that has been a very good return. Now, there are ongoing claims against Mercedes and other manufacturers. This is going through the courts at the moment. There was a court hearing in January. Court hearings are scheduled for, I think, next month. March there's another one in May. We've got currently 12,000 Mercedes claims and other manufacturers 20,000 to 22,000. And we've got another 4,000 odd in the pipeline, something like that. Those are nice numbers. The VW settlement involved 12,000, so it's about the same size as Mercedes, but we have considerable numbers of other manufacturers on top. All of this is expenses incurred, so the net comes through straight to the bottom line. We also have clinical and professional negligence claims. Aston Hall, which we did in 2018, just after float, was a very unpleasant and distressing child abuse case at a psychiatric hospital in the Midlands. We had upwards of 80 claimants for that, and we won that. And obviously we didn't take huge success fees for that because that would just be adding insult to injury. But we do get paid for all the legal work that we do in it, and therefore it's a very good thing to do. We announced last month that we also are involved in the Thirlwall inquiry. The Thirlwall inquiry is looking at the problems with the Cheshire NHS Trust and this woman, Lucy Letby, who you've doubtless heard of, who very distressingly was found guilty of murdering these children in the hospital. There's an inquiry in that, and we have been engaged as one of the legal advisors to that. And also a thing called Long COVID Doctors for Action, which is a class action around the provision of protection, PPE and other things during the COVID pandemic. These are high-profile cases, and we believe that they're going to get the Bond Turner name into the press a lot more going forward. So you can see that actually this is turning into, once again, a really good contributor to earnings. It's lumpy, obviously, because you occasionally have a settlement and then you'll just have ongoing stuff. But the money that we put out in terms of day-to-day legal costs continues throughout. And I'd stress that we don't take people off other things. We don't take people away from credit hire to work on this. Once again, that's a specialist team of Clin and Profneg negotiators. So current trading, vehicle numbers are very strong. They have remained very strong. We've got about 2,300, and that's quite hot. I mean, previously, post-float, we were looking in the sort of 1,500s. That's 2018, 2019. Then we took it down to generate cash, and we are increasing fleet numbers when we can justify the expenditure and generate cash at the same time, because the intention for 2023 was to generate cash. That all will be revealed when the final results come out. As I said, motorcycles still the majority of the fleet. We're very happy with housing disrepair. At the moment, this is all housing associations and local authorities. We're not really doing private landlords at the moment. That will come, and there are a few floating around. But at the moment, there's so much business coming in for the housing associations that we have to prioritise. As I say, we've been looking at cash generation, and we have paid down a considerable amount of debt. That's not only with the VW agreement money, but also from internal resources elsewhere. Historically, we paid a dividend of 1.5p. For the last couple of years, we've put it off until the full year, so we haven't paid an interim dividend. We have to balance the need for cash within the business with the fact that we have a progressive dividend policy and we like to look after our shareholders. So that's a yield of about 2.6% at the moment. Good Lord, I think we are more or less done. I've got 2 minutes left, which is I'm semi-proud of. But very happy to take any questions if you wish.
Yes, thank you very much, Nick. Yeah, we'll take questions in the room. We've got one at the back here, back left.
One of your early slides showed a decline in earnings per share. What was the reason for that?
Where are we?
That one there.
That's
7.5% decline in earnings per share. Why was that?
We did actually have an increase in the number of shares in issue,
Right.
due to the vesting of a share options plan, which increased the number of shares in issue.
Okay.
But we can talk about it further if you wish.
Got two questions, so if we go to this gentleman and then...
What work do you do to make sure that your client is not at least partially even at fault? How sure are you that they're not?
Okay. Well, we have a team whose job it is to look at these things. So the initial claim, we ask all the usual questions. Google Maps, what happened? Talk me through it. So, okay, you look it up. You came out of this junction here. This happened there. Yeah, we try to make sure. We have actually, the guys there have been doing it for 25 years, so they can smell a rat a mile off, to be honest. You'd be surprised how many times there's an admission of liability immediately. The number of times people come up and go, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't see you. We ring the various people. We ring witnesses. We ring the allegedly at fault party, and once again you'd be surprised. Oh, I thought I'd be hearing from you. Yeah, I'm really sorry I didn't see him. Once you've got that on tape, then you're there. So we are confident that 99% of the time when we take the decision to put the vehicle on the road, we are making the right decision because our guy is not at fault. I mean, I'll give you an example. We had a nasty accident on the M25. Nobody injured, thank goodness. Lorry pulled out and hit a car, took it into the central reservation, and a couple of witnesses were there and said, yeah, it's very straightforward. He was trying to get into a gap that wasn't there. And the driver said, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't see him. And of course, subsequent to that, he's changed his story and is trying to claim, well, actually, the car drove into him, which takes a bit, but we have 2 witnesses on that. And that kind of background means that we're reasonably confident.
So if there are no witnesses, then you just...
If there are no witnesses, you have to look at how plausible it is. Is somebody coming out of there? Could you see that? And you weigh up. You do, to a certain extent, there's a bit of character weighing to see what would happen. But broadly speaking, given the relationships we have with our garages, we don't have the kind of speculative stuff that you used to have, let's be honest, in the days of whiplash. And as you know, whiplash claims were basically put to bed by the Civil Liabilities Act, which came in 2022. And that means that you can no longer claim for large damages from whiplash. And there were a number of whiplash cases where there was a collision between one man and his brother-in-law, and they both had 7 people in the car. That kind of stuff, which was rather more dubious.
So you're making profit and you're paying down debt and you're further developing the business. Is there any sort of time scale that when you can sort of like have enough debt paid down and it's developed enough so that you get a progressive increase in the dividend? We
would like to have a progressive increase in the dividend because that's what we said at float. I think we paid a penny and then we've been at a penny and a half ever since. COVID kind of got in the way, and we've stuck at a penny and a half. We're certainly not planning on cutting it unless something else happens. So yes, we would like to. The issue is obviously that we are anxious to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves because they're not going to come back again. So for instance, the emissions cases, although there are many other negligence claims, the emissions cases are a one-off. Once they're done, they're done. So we want to make sure we can get the biggest slice that we can of that pie, and then we'll move on. But we watch our cash very carefully, and it's something, the chairman and his wife own 35% of the shares, and I'm sure they'd like a dividend too. Yes, sir.
Sorry, you asked them? Sorry, just wait 1 second for the microphone.
Hi, at the beginning you asked whether we'd seen you before
yes.
about Anexo. I saw a similar presentation from you probably about 3 or 4 years ago.
Right.
And your share price was quite a bit higher than it is
It was,
now.
yeah.
Why?
There are a number of issues there. I mean, I could be here all night talking about the state of the small cap market in the UK in general. That's not an excuse, that's just a fact. One of the things that I think people were unhappy about was the level of debt. People felt that the debt was too high. We disagree. We actually, I mean, in theory, the balance sheet could actually cope with more debt without too much difficulty. But we have listened to them, and that's why in the first half of the year we were paying down debt, and we're keeping a close eye on our debt and how much we can get bang for our buck out of the money that we have to use. I think specifically, people got hold of the wrong end of the stick about the VW agreement. And this, to a certain extent, is because we were restricted by the NDA in what we could say. And in fact, our RNS about this was not drafted by us, it was drafted by VW's lawyers. And therefore, it didn't give a gross figure. You can imagine that the one thing VW doesn't want people to know is what the gross figure was. So we came out at 7.2, and of course a lot of people said, well, hang on, you've been running around the market saying you're going to make 20 million plus. So that's a huge disappointment. And because it didn't explain it well, and we were not allowed to explain it well, that was a mistaken view. But I think that hit the share price as well, which is exceptionally irritating because, as always, it's easy to lose value and it's very hard to build it back up again. According to our analyst estimates, we're trading, I think, on 3.5, 4 times earnings. And it's a fact. We are very, very, very cheap. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but I shouldn't really mention Investors Chronicle in this august surroundings. But we are their #1 value pick for 2024. That's Simon Thompson's column in the Investors Chronicle, and that's been gratifying, and that's actually got the share price moving again. The other thing is we have had a couple of decent sellers out there, and that always depresses the price. They, as far as I'm aware, are now done. And once again, we're hoping for about. So, the top of this was £2. So we were a £200 million company very easily. It's very disappointing to be 75 million, and we should hopefully be back on the right track.
Any more questions? I had a couple, Nick, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I think on one of the slides you had a market share of 3%. You talked about how you didn't necessarily have a lot of competitors. What do other operators in the market look like, and what does that mean?
There aren't very many. I mean, there are some who work for the insurance company.
Sure.
Which is of no interest to us. So their margins are wafer thin, because they're the man in the middle, and so therefore they're always going to be under pressure. There are a few very local firms who try and do this thing, but they do it on a very, very small scale. The barrier to entry is that if you want to build up a network of independent contacts of 1,000 plus, that's going to take a long time, and it's also going to take, a lot of money. So actually, we are reasonably relaxed about our position. Also, it's worth saying that we turn away 50% of the business we're offered, either because, as the gentleman at the back asked, there's a potential that we think that they're not suitable for us to take on, but also because maybe they're too expensive. If you've got a Range Rover that's going to cost £15,000 to repair, I can put several bikes on the road for that. So it'd be much easier to concentrate on the bike claims for that, and the Range Rover will have to look after itself somewhere else. So. There's plenty of room in the market, and not many other people doing it, which is another reason why we want to carry on doing it, because once again, people are going to be a bit stuck without it.
Is there any scope for sort of consolidation? You mentioned sort of those smaller operators. Would there be any value in kind of buying those, or
we've seen quite a lot of people come to us and say, we want to pull out of this because we don't really know how to do it. Do you want to take on our book? To be honest, largely when people are giving you their historic books of work, it's usually the books that aren't going to settle or aren't going to settle particularly well because they've done all the good ones. But we do look at everything all the time, and we're always looking at, we've hired a lot of lawyers from various places, and we've now got 3 offices, Liverpool, Bolton and Leeds, and there's probably going to be another office at some stage in the future, somewhere where is an insurance hub, because a lot of our staff have come from the other side, they've come from the insurance companies. So, there's all sorts of opportunities, and we do look at everything. We're offered those opportunities all the time.
Excellent. Any more questions in the room? We've got one question just in the middle there.
I just wondered if you have any views on these electric scooters.
I have lots of views on electric scooters. As an employee of the company, I'm not sure what I can say about them, but we don't do them, and we have no interest particularly in doing them because it's obviously a minefield. We do cycles, but that's relatively straightforward. If you get knocked off your bike, we'll just give you a new one. There's never a repair on a bike, and we do sponsor various cycling events in the UK, so it's reasonably good for our profile. But scooters, somebody else's problem.
Excellent, great. I think if that's it, that's it. Thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you, folks.